Quick question. Does anyone remember Kappa Mikey? After an accumulation of anime openings, One Piece clips, and way too many Conan remotes, YouTube has finally recommended something worthy of my time. Something I legit thought was a fever dream. Y'all could have had a normal vanilla intro, but because this showed up in my feed one morning, I just need to spend a minute to discuss its brilliance. If you don't know, Kappa Mikey is an anime TV show that never aired outside one of Nickelodeon's sister channels, Nicktoons Network. I found this channel one day, amazed that I unlocked a new set of cartoons I'd never seen before. It felt like Boomerang, but for Nick shows. Anyways, the premise is about an amateur actor named Mikey Simon who gets his big break from a Japanese contest and moves to Japan to star in this show, Lilymoo. From what you see, it's not pretty to look at, whether it was intentional or not, but the jokes are what carry it. The concept of sticking the Western flash animated character into this world of anime with a cast of tropes such as the furry talking mascot, the choice of two different waifus, literal Goku. It's all a very interesting concept. This blend of West and Eastern culture uniting as one. And I thought this was the only clear representation. Until I read Scott Pilgrim. What I always thought was just another comic turned out to be an Americanized manga centered around a 23-year-old Canadian who fights against 7 evil exes of his literal dream girl, Ramona Flowers. A simple premise executed through an art style you would normally associate with a manga. The creator, Brian O'Malley, was particularly fond of shonen style manga, which wasn't so popular in North America back in the 2000s. At the time, he only read one series, Ranma and a Half, which I never read or heard of, but I have read my fair share of the mainstream stuff like Naruto, Bleach, and of course, One Piece. Reading this comic, I noticed certain panels and even character introductions that reminded me of early One Piece, turning this whole experience into an unexpected wave of nostalgia. So here you have a comic with a heavy Japanese influence to help exaggerate the lives and drama of these average Canadians. I have never been to Canada, but after reading this, I feel like I just spent a week there with the locals, learning about certain spots that were based on real landmarks, and some might not even be there anymore. Scott Pilgrim can also be considered an homage to video game culture as well, because the references are just abundant. Certain panels or pages of art that just give love to the Mario franchise, Sonic, Legend of Zelda, and even nods to other comics such as the iconic X-Men patch you see stitched into Scott's jacket. Honestly, I could just make an entire video just picking out certain references and just talking about the comic by itself, but it's much easier to summarize it down to I enjoyed the hell out of the series. Knowing the inspiration and history and just the creator's vibing personality, this easily became one of my all-time favorite comics. And when it came to the movie, I had no expectations. It's been so many years since I watched it, only remembering that Michael Cera played Scott Pilgrim. Coming straight from the comic, I already knew changes were inevitable. To crunch an entire year into 2 hours would have been a lot to ask, so I was ready to see it for what it was. And then, I saw 2 words pop up during the opening credits. Edgar Wright. From the moment I saw that name, all my precognitive thoughts and worries about this being a bad adaptation were quenched with a capital Q. Because even if it didn't follow the story beat by beat, I knew it would still be entertaining regardless. He's one of the few directors and writers I have grown to trust with my movies. Shaun the Dead, Baby Driver, Ant-Man. So my question today is, does Wright's adaptation do justice to the comic? Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy as we discuss Canada's #1 shonen hero, the douche, the sloth, the dimwit. This is Scott Pilgrim. Count us off, Kim.
1, 2, 3, 4!
If it wasn't for Plumtree, Scott Pilgrim might not have existed. They were one of O'Malley's favorite bands, delivering the biggest inspiration from one of their songs called Scott Pilgrim. I listened to the song, then the rest of the album, twice, noticing the similarities between the bittersweet tones of the music and the comic's simple yet deep universe O'Malley created for himself. Simple in the fact that this world takes place within his own neighborhood, placing the characters in certain locations that are familiar and easy to draw, from the castle at Casa Loma to the Goodwill right down the block. As for the choice of characters, O'Malley took inspiration from his own life, as some of the events correlated with how Scott lived in the comics. He did share a bed with a friend for 6 months. Started 2002 with a big breakup and ended it with finding a new girl, all the while picturing the world of Scott Pilgrim being similar to his own, just with more creative liberties. Yet, don't let their normality fool you, as most of the characters carry a lot of baggage with them. Take our main character Scott for instance. O'Malley really took his design into consideration because on the surface, you just see this guy who's pretty average as the bass guitarist for his band, Sex Bomb, and first impressions would tell you that he's harmless, especially if you focus on the eyes. It's pretty common in manga to understand the character's good nature based on how round or narrow their eyes are. This was also one of the main reasons why Michael Cera was chosen as Scott. From Wright's own words, he was looking for an actor that people would still follow even if he was an ass, because that's what Scott essentially is. An asshole. Not an intentional one, but for constantly forgetting about his past relationships and not taking the time to learn from them made him both insensitive and just oblivious of what his actions could do. And to show off his faults, the story starts him off dating the high schooler, Knives Chow.
Scott, if your life had a face, I would punch it.
Yeah. Wait, what?
At Julie's party where Scott meets Ramona for the first time, I didn't get why she was so against Scott pursuing her. By the end, I understood completely. Volume by volume, this series starts to become a little like Matthew McConaughey's Ghost of Girlfriend's Past, where Scott's previous lovers and love interests reappear in his life, piecing together his mysterious past that's often mentioned, but never explored until the 6th and final volume where he's forced to confront it in the form of his nega self. Though not as mysterious as the girl he's currently pining for. No, not that pine. Ramona Flowers, the new delivery girl in town being able to travel through dreams via the subspace highway that just so happens to be connected with Scott's dreams.
What?
You're just having some idiotic dream.
Does that mean we can make out?
I really enjoyed her character, mostly in the comics. Almost all the movie's main heroes share this similar taste of dry, fast-paced wit to keep with the runtime, since the relationship was minimized to 2 weeks, as opposed to a full year. Not saying Mary Elizabeth Winstead did a terrible job or anything, but Ramona was one of the few characters that surprised me by the end. Initially, I thought she was going to be this one-note character who remained a complete mystery, but because we had about a year's worth of content, there was enough time to really expose the honeymoon phase between these lovers. Her humor, her smiles, the moments where she was committed to this relationship just as much as him. It was all just so real. They all felt real, the problems, their personalities, the way they talked and treated one another. It felt like I was no longer reading a comic, but a wonderfully designed excerpt on O'Malley's life. I really enjoyed these people, and it was the only aspect that was hard not to nitpick from the movie adaptation. Michael Cera as Scott was half and half for me. There were some scenes I thought he nailed perfectly, and others that just felt flat. The biggest disappointment for me though had to be Kim Pine's character. I really didn't expect much from her until the story started focusing more on her relationship with Scott and the fact that she was one of his only exes that stayed in touch. If anyone knew about Scott and his relationships, it would be Kim. And I'll go as far as to say that she's probably the main reason why Scott's the way he is, aside from Gideon's influence. Since they are in the band and pretty much meet each other on a daily basis, she kind of became an example that reinforced his actions and motivated the thought of, see? Not all my relationships ended badly, we're still friends. And what a good friend she is, keeping Scott's morale high while fighting against the Katayanagi twins and even helping him confront himself, literally. She might not look much, but Kim does come through for him in many ways. And if there was just one scene between the two of them in the film, I would have died a happy man. But there was nothing necessarily wrong with her performance. Alison Pill delivered on those sharp one-liners, but there wasn't enough to really push her performance in front of the others. Aubrey Plaza's Julie was a solid choice, as well as Ellen Wong for Knives Chow, especially Knives. O'Malley's intention with her character was to represent the coming of age. She's the youngest of the group and naturally doesn't carry a lot of experience. Scott was her first love, and when he broke up with her, the remainder of the series was just seeing how many life phases she could go through. The crazy stalker phase, the rebelling period of dyeing her hair and attempting to kill his current lover, the rebound phase and dating young Neil in order to make Scott jealous. She brings a lot of energy to the group, which Ellen Wong really channeled to stand out from these jaded monotones. Same goes for Wallace, Scott's gay roommate. His introduction was pretty boring until the later volumes where he became a little more flamboyant with his persona, always going to parties and drinking till the morning dawn. The movie's Wallace doesn't take the character to that extreme, but the dry sarcasm was there, and it worked. Also, I didn't know Macaulay Culkin had a brother who acted. I honestly thought he just de-aged for this movie. And these are just characters that showed up in the movie. The comic is a little more expansive with introducing one of Scott's old high school friends, Lisa Miller, Knives' dad who goes on the hunt for Scott's head, and many more that were probably inserted as cameos in the movie. Characterization was one of the main appeals for this story, and both O'Malley and Wright delivered through humorous, in-depth dialogue and a good eye for casting, utilizing the actors to their full potential, however big or small their roles were. It all came together to enhance the comedy aspect that Wright envisioned, but that's just half the fun. He brought the characters to life, but what about the art? The second Matthew Patel crashed through the roof, that's when I really started getting invested in the movie. It took a while to warm up with our heroes, I'll admit, but seeing how the action scenes were handled solidified my enjoyment for the rest of the film. One of Wright's biggest influences was the Italian film Danger Diabolic, which is based on this really popular comic in Italy. One of the things he took away from it was the production's try anything attitude, the kind of attitude that had no intention to make it look realistic and separate it from our sense of reality, which is what Scott Pilgrim does. Since this story is centered around Scott, his perception of the world and his problems are visualized like a video game, with its execution following an adventurous anime storyline. In this world, ninjas can pop out of the shadows, a parental swordsman can slice a bus in half, vegans hold incredible psychic powers, and robots. Lots of robots. O'Malley turned Canada into an imaginative battleground, and Wright did a fantastic job capturing that aspect. The flavor text for the onomatopoeia sounds, the way the transitions shift through certain shots and scenes, such as the case when Scott breaks up with Knives, with the silver bars acting as physical panel lines, give a visualization of Scott pushing her out of his mind in replacement for Ramona. This scene was straight out of the comic too, and the attempt to replicate the act of reading that scene through visuals alone shows Wright's dedication to stick with the source. The editing in this movie has aged pretty well and never gets tiring to look at, as well as the performances from the villains. They were one of the main highlights I had with the movie, and again, this casting, like looking back, you would think Wright just knew these people were born to be superheroes. From Marvel to DC to even Sky High, a majority of these actors ended up in larger superhero projects, with some of the well-known ones taking up the side of evil. The movie did a great job with the second fight against Lucas Lee, not because it had Chris Evans, who was perfectly casted to play one of those douchey badass characters, or the fact that his introduction played to the tune of the Universal theme, cracking his neck to the... but because it gave a proper fight. In the comics, Scott gets thrown once, and then it's just a casual conversation about Ramona and the first mention of the League, with Lucas proving his sellout status until he's challenged to grind down the dangerous railway. But in the movie, they start fighting during the shoot, with Lucas summoning a horde of his stunt doubles to fight in his name, which is super hilarious. I was, however, saddened by the shortening of Envy's screen time. Like, don't get me wrong, I completely understand why. As a critic, I know that the runtime limited any possibility to explore some kind of arc with her character, so they just got all the best scenes and compiled them to give her a song and 2 scenes with Scott, which was nice. But speaking as a fan, I really enjoyed her story. Not to sound like a simp, but I think it would have been a much better masterpiece if we just had more Envy. Personally, she had the best volume of the series. I liked how her backstory was handled, showing the transformation from nerdy Natalie to Queen Envy, giving context to how she and Scott broke up, and I especially liked how this particular battle became a conflict for both Scott and Ramona, as both their exes hooked up with one another. And we also gotta appreciate the organization of this league and how it mirrors the progression of a generic video game. As Scott continues to fight against the X's, the battles get more difficult and personal depending on the amount of time Ramona spent with them.
You had a sexy face?
It meant nothing. I didn't think it would count.
It meant nothing?
I was just a little bit curious.
Matthew Patel only dated Ramona for like a week, so his connection with her wasn't as serious, but worked well to introduce the long fight ahead. Yet, he's no contest in comparison to, say, the Katayanagi twins, who were really downplayed in the film. They were pretty close to destroying Scott in the comics, pushing his buttons and getting to his head about the crumbling relationship, which does happen as Ramona disappears by the end. Speaking of endings, wanna know how this one played out? Because, believe it or not, the answer is not so simple. Scott Pilgrim is probably the only film where I could say it has alternative endings depending on who you choose. If you think Scott and Knives should end together, there's an ending for that. If you think Scott and Ramona were meant to be, there's an ending for that. And if you think Scott shouldn't be with anyone, then you wait until Gideon kills him, turn off the TV, and go about your merry way. At the time of production, O'Malley didn't finish volume 6 of the comic series, so there was no ending to be adapted, leaving Wright to create one himself. This is actually the first story I've encountered where the movie did something original over the source material, which explains why this end sequence is very different from the comic. But there is some truth as to which one you prefer, because while the movie really differentiated not just from the ending but the entire story's pacing, it provided some sense of nostalgia, because let me tell you, volume 5 and 6 take a real depressing turn that hits close to home. Major changes are taking place around Scott, really emphasizing this statement about moving forward. It didn't happen out of nowhere either, but right around volume 5, that's when I started to realize what was happening. Eventually Scott and Wallace are at the end of their lease and decide to go their separate ways, with Scott living at Ramona'S for a while. Steven Stills gets so engrossed with recording an album that Sex Bomb stop having their band sessions and slowly retire as a group, with no one coming over to chill with young Neil anymore. But this was his intention. O'Malley wanted volume 5 to be Scott's darkest hour, followed up with volume 6's redemption arc as the conclusion. These two volumes really did become the worst period in Scott's life, starting right after Knives telling Ramona that Scott cheated on the both of them.
You cheated on both of us?
You cheated on me with Knives. Cheated on Knives with you.
Is there a difference?
You weren't robbed?
She leaves, and Scott lets 4 months go by, avoiding to confront the last evil ex, Gideon, until he learns to confront his past with the help of Kim and nigga Scott. And he doesn't unlock true understanding until midway through the fight when Envy tries to help Gideon but is rejected instantly, leading into this cycle of the dumper and the dumpee. This statement of understanding him better really states how parallel Scott and Gideon are to each other, the only difference being that Scott wasn't that aware of what he was doing. Meanwhile, Gideon was fully aware of his actions and really wanted to take control of his exes, literally implanting himself inside their heads and cryogenetically freezing them like some sick collection. And there was one line he says that could pretty much sum up the majority of these characters and their flaws. I've been trapped in my own head since the day I was born. Scott not taking into account the feeling of his previous lovers, Ramona's fear of staying still and always changing herself before the world changes her. This focus on self-absorption is so fascinating to me, which I'm glad Wright highlighted near the end of the movie when Scott is apologizing to both the girls. Change is hard, man, but you can't avoid forever. And the sooner you realize your ways and make an attempt to be better, only then could you start being happy with who you are. In both cases, Gideon goes down with a mental struggle in the comics and a dance beatdown in the movie. After seeing the movie, O'Malley really wanted to create a finale that rivaled the final confrontation, taking the fight into Ramona's head, allowing her a chance to fight against her douchey demon. It really delivered the closure she needed to complete her development. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the ultimate question. And it does make sense for Scott to get back with Ramona. They are just really perfect for each other. One's always stuck in place while the other just needs to move. It shouldn't work, but that's just what relationships are. It's work, and it takes time to nurture. You should never be afraid to try though. All it takes is a little practice. I'll say it right now, neither versions are bad. If I had known the comic was inspired by manga, I would have read it colorless. There's just something about mangaka artists and their way of handling the black and white scheme. So the next time I read this, and there will be a next time, I'm going full on noir. This comic is just amazing. All the characters have fleshed out personalities that give you this impression that they could be real, thanks to the narrative. All the references and meta humor were super entertaining, and it might take me a couple more reads to find them all. It's one of those projects that holds its own identity tightly, and it would be very hard to mimic without the right sort of passion. As for the movie, I don't think anyone could have done it better than Wright. His ambitions to bring a comic book movie to life was achieved in more ways than one, and it would never get boring to watch. The changes he made were suitable for the tone he was going for, and the simplified and absurd plotline aided with the comedic pacing and incredible cinematography. This is not a movie you should skip over. This It's not a comic to just glaze over. Scott Pilgrim is just a love child to all things nerdy and pop culture, right down to the video game, which was fun up until Gideon and his stupid stages, ridiculous enemies that just got you on the ropes, and a godly form that just seems impossible without the sword. God damn this flippin' boss! Yeah, how you like it now, I said? I win! Oh, god damn it.